Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Today we're talking about presentation in the queer community. This is something I've sort of touched on in previous videos. We haven't really done a specific video for it, and I'm seeing once again a resurgence on social media of people, especially women, talking about how do they make sure they present so that they read queer. For me, there's so many problematic words in that question, it's hard to know where to start. What seems to happen is that women who fit into the femme, lesbian, or femme, women-loving women category tend to voice frustration about the fact that other queer people don't see them as queer because they look like all the other women out there. AKA because of heteronormativity. Because when you meet somebody, the default assumption for society in general is that they are straight. That's literally what heteronormativity is. I see it so many different places, but mostly on TikTok, where women are asking how, now that they understand this part of themselves, maybe they were under the impression that they were only attracted to men for a long time, and now they realize that that's not the case, or that's not solely the case. And now they want to know how they're supposed to convey to others in the queer community that they're not just interested in men. And they ask questions like, what do I wear? Do I need to put a rainbow on me somewhere? That sort of thing. And I think most of it's tongue-in-cheek. But through my therapeutic experience, I see it a lot when women are just coming out, when they're not entirely sure how to tell people either who already know them or strangers who they are interested in, because that would open the door then to some connections with people who would be mutually attracted. And I get the frustration when you grow up in a society steeped in heterosexism and then you go to a bar as a woman, the assumption is that men are there and you have your pick, right? The assumption also from a lot of cis straight men is that if a man approaches you, you will in fact want them. Not always true. On the other side of this, I get this question, especially from newly out queer people, especially from people who are just starting to date people who are like them. And their question always is like, how do I approach somebody without it feeling predatory? Because they themselves have lived situations where it feels predatory, right? So overall, we've got the question of clothing. How do I dress? How do I present myself? How do I speak to people? How do I approach people? All of that is in presentation, because those are all questions of outside. How do I make my outside make sense to others? And I want to be really clear, this also happens with men. There are men out there who are gay but don't fit what society has put in as the gay stereotype. And I did a video on that, and I'm going to put the link down below in the description box so you can look at that. There are a lot of men out there that don't feel like they fit into the queer subculture because of how they present and because of the things that interest them and the things that don't interest them. It feels like they're sort of boxed out of the queer community because they don't fit what the public sees a queer man to be. The sole difference that I will say is pretty distinct is that those who are socialized as men are generally taught that the approach is on them. And so when a man approaches another man, it's different from a woman approaching another woman, because most of those women who are going to approach other women understand how predatory it can actually feel when you are approached out in public by someone who's wishing to be some sort of a romantic partner. So let's reel it back to how this struggle actually started, okay? A long time ago, there was an understanding there were two ways of presenting as a lesbian woman, and that is either butch or femme. But much of it falls into this, how do I identify and how do I let other people know how I identify? I hear the complaint a lot from those who would put themselves in the femme category. People don't realize that they're queer and they're not sure how to convey that. And then we hear from people in what we would call the butch category who don't know how to convey to people that that's not the only dimension about them. And thirst traps don't help. Well, there's no single standard of beauty or presentation necessarily in the straight community. There's also not one in the queer community where you could make a case for one in the straight community. You almost couldn't even make a case for one in the queer community. That diversity is beautiful and also complicated. We live in a time where in some areas it's just not safe to be gay. And if you approach the wrong person in the wrong way, you run the risk of at best offending them, at worst being involved in some sort of an altercation that you don't want to be involved in, which makes it super complicated. There are dating apps that are geared towards the queer community, but those dating apps become so problematic in the way that people present themselves and what they say they do or don't want in someone they're going to talk to. There is nothing wrong with having a preference to the type of person that you want to date. Everyone in the world has boxes that need to be checked, has opinions on what type of person they want to be with. Because if you're looking for someone you're attracted to, you're not going to be attracted to every single person. Because dating apps are really just what you see. It's somebody on paper, two-dimensionally. You have no idea what they're really like, because you can make yourself look great on those, or you could just be like someone who's bad at writing and you don't know what pictures look good, and you put yourself out there and you don't get the responses that you want. Dating apps are inherently superficial, because how else would you do it? But there's also very problematic things on some of those dating apps and some of those dating sites, and also some of the social media that we consume, that sort of glorifies one way of being for the ability to, and I hate this term, pass. I'm using the term because it's used quite a bit in the community, and not because I think it's in any way an actually appropriate term, and creates this free-for-all with these really lousy people who come at people who present a different way and accuse them of, wanting to be men. So for instance, there's a TikToker that I follow who didn't initially talk about her sexuality and then did, and people's comments are,
"Oh, you're too pretty to be a lesbian,"
or
"Maybe you haven't found the right guy," or
"Are you sure you want to lock yourself down like that with a label?"
Similarly, there's someone with a more masculine presentation, and people are saying,
"You just want to be a guy so you can get women."
The level of offense that I take when it's not even said to me, I cannot imagine what it must be like to have that said to you when you're just kind of putting yourself out there. And I know for most people who have a more masculine presentation, that is sort of a thing that they've accepted. You should not have to accept that. You should not have to have that in your face where people are detracting from your value because they don't understand it. And people who have more of a femme presentation, you do not need to be objectified like that just to have that worth. People shouldn't feel like they have the ability to just objectify you and use your appearance as a way to villainize an entire community. And they do that by saying you're too pretty to be gay. Like, what is that? That's steeped in heteronormativity. That's steeped in the patriarchy. And here's what I want to say to everyone. This is going to piss some people off. I just want you to know that. So if you get mad about this, I want you to sit with it for a minute and think about what I'm really saying. What I'm not about to say, number one, is that anyone's presentation is anything other than who they are being presented on the outside, okay? I would never say that anyone is like putting on a front or being a certain way because that's what society expects of them. What I'm talking about is the perception of the presentations. So here we are. You've heard me talk a lot about the patriarchy. You've heard me talk a lot about men and the way that men objectify women and, maybe even don't really like women in general. Consider this. When a woman is feminine presenting, she perceives herself to have, and some in the queer community perceive her to have, less standing in the queer community. She's less gay. She has to figure out how to dress in order to be read by other community members, because she can't just be her and wear what she wants to wear and have people know. And then we look at those with a more masculine presentation, especially when TikTok kind of blew up during the pandemic. There's so many women who would come to a thirst trap type account, more masculine presenting, and say,
"Oh, you could make me gay."
Right? Like, that is so steeped in patriarchy and in the idea that men are still the king. Men are still on top, because for a woman to be valued as queer within this umbrella of the LGBTQIA plus community, she has to be more masculine presenting. What? The entire point of relationships between two or more women, like relationships between two or more women, is that there's not a man, right? You don't need a man in that relationship. We all have in us so ingrained the idea of patriarchy, of men running the world. And I don't care how women's power you are, if you do not see people's presentation as valid just as it is, you are doing the patriarchy's work for them. I know people who will say, I'm not really attracted to more masculine presenting women, or I'm not really attracted to more feminine presenting women. And those are preferences, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But the understanding of someone's value in their queerness, of your own or someone else's, usually it's about your own, right? How many of you have seen the TikToks where like, do I have to wear cargo pants and a tank top in order to have someone see me as a lesbian? What? How many stereotypes that the heteronormative community has put on us did you just put on yourself and others in that thought process? And I'm not saying it's necessarily your fault, but every time we put that stuff out there, we're continuing to harm the queer community. That needs to stop. We need to stop harming ourselves. There's enough harm coming from out there. We need to stop doing it to ourselves. And so even the comments people get on their TikToks, on their social media in general, about them not being feminine enough or not being masculine enough in order to read as queer, those assumptions get into our psyches. They get into our hearts. They get into this idea of who we're supposed to be and how the rest of the community will accept us. I've posted extensively about gatekeeping in the queer community, but this is some weird kind of gatekeeping, really, if you really look at it. This idea that queerness for women is judged on how much masculinity you present is literally the patriarchy. That's what it is. There's no getting around that. It's not different for guys. It's not, because the understanding of a man being valid as queer because he acts feminine puts them in the hierarchy of our world lower than cis straight men. And then you've got masculine presenting queer men who don't know where they belong because that's not written in anywhere, right? This understanding that you can be whoever you are inside and also like whoever you like or want to be romantically involved or sexually involved with whoever you want to be romantically or sexually involved with. That's not written into our code because the code is still masculine first, feminine second. And it translates very clearly into the queer community because we didn't know it was happening. I would assume most of us didn't know it was happening. But I get these questions all the time about presentation. How do I present better? And how do I let people know that I'm queer? And the fight, the real fight is against heteronormativity. It should not be against our own community. Again, my answer here is different than my answer would be if you were seeing me for therapy. But my answer here is, how do you want to present yourself to the world? What clothing makes you feel confident as a person? What clothing makes you feel like you are in the skin that you belong in and how you belong in it? That authenticity is what we go for first, not how we get cruised. We do everything we can to be who we are. And when we are living in our most authentic skins, we are usually the most generous with other people in understanding that their authenticity looks different from our authenticity. And that is what makes life beautiful, not which category do you fit into better. So while this is just one myth in the women loving women genre, there are a lot more. And if you want to hear any more about them, I'd love for you to take a look at this video right here, Myths About Women Who Love Women, and let me know what you think. That's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all next time. And until then, take care of yourselves and each other.